Hello and welcome to episode number 89 of The Pitcher or the Hitter, the podcast by the M-SABR Dynasty League for the M-SABR Dynasty League. I am Cam.
I'm Sahil.
And as you can probably tell, I have a little bit of a cold. Got that sore throat. I may have some coughs to edit out. I've got a little bit of that sorority girl voice that I get when I'm feeling a little losing my voice. But that's okay. We're going to power through because it was a very exciting week and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, sorority girl voice. That's an interesting description of it. I don't.
I think you came up with the description, or at the very least, you were there. I distinctly remember you, me, and Greg at your apartment talking about how my voice sounds like a sorority girl when I've got the vocal fry going on.
That 100% sounds like a comment Greg would make. That's 100% a Greg comment. I think I was there now. I vaguely remember this, but that's funny. Yeah. But yeah, so we'll try and keep this one a little briefer. Try to cut out some of the extra banter as well. So hopefully Cam's voice lasts from now until the end of the podcast. Maybe you'll hear a little more of me talking, which I mean, let's be honest, I usually do more of the talking anyway. So is it really going to be too different than a normal episode?
I don't think it will be.
Exactly. Cam gets it. All right, so we are going to start by talking about the trades that went down this week. There were three trades to talk about. Two of them are really significant, and I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around them. While you still have your voice, let's start with yours. The Liam Hendriks Experience has agreed to trade Grayson Rodriguez, Nolan Gorman, Nick Pivetta, and Tyler Zuber to the Crone Zone for Framber Valdez, Jordan Montgomery, JB Bukowskis, and Andrews 2100 third.
Yes, so this was a lot of fun. Very fun, very crazy, shocking deal. I guess let's start out with the most important part. That is Tyler Zuber and JB Bukowskis. Always good to swap those two guys back and forth. Get some fresh faces on the roster. Although we did end up using one of our players to be named later that we had outstanding to send those guys back. So I have Zuber back on my team where he belongs. I also now own 4 of the 2100 third round picks. So I'm really slowly catching them all, collecting those third rounders in 2100. Going to be very exciting for whoever owns my team then. At the very least, they'll have some trade chips. But the real part of the deal, so I was talking with Andrew about some Framber trades. Well, really, I was talking with another team about acquiring another another starting pitcher who I like a little better than both of those guys. Those talks involved Anthony Volpe or Grayson Rodriguez or on top of Anthony Rizzo. I'm not going to go too much into specifics just in case something does come up there. But I was talking about Framber with Andrew. He wanted a starting pitcher. I told him I wasn't going to budge on Grayson. We talked a little bit about Cole Henry, who's someone that I like a lot. But then Andrew came up with the idea, hey, what if I added Jordan Montgomery? Would you then throw in Grayson Rodriguez? And then I thought about it for a bit, and Nolan Gorman was involved kind of from the beginning, but I thought about it a little bit and I figured, how could I not? This is just something I can't pass up. Grayson Rodriguez was so hard to give up, but getting not one but 2 young-ish starting pitchers who I've always liked. I've had my eye on both of them for a while. I've wanted Montgomery since the start of this year, really since the offseason. And then Framber Valdez, of course, I almost acquired last year. But to get both of them was just too good of a deal to pass up. I knew I had to make this work. I gave Pivetta back to Andrew since I figured I'd be cutting him anyway. But yeah, no, Framber Valdez and Jordan Montgomery. I consider them both top 40, even top 30 pitchers. Framber is on a ridiculous quality start tear. I believe he's got 18 quality starts in a row, something like that. Jordan Montgomery's not quite having the year he had last year, but he was just traded away from Yankee Stadium, which is pretty huge, to a pretty big Busch Stadium. and now he's on a team that plays the Reds and Pirates a whole bunch. So I could definitely see his value going up the remainder of the year. Both of these pitchers have already made an incredible start on my team over the weekend. So it's paying off pretty well, even though I guess I didn't need it too much. Overall, I think on Andrew's end, it is a win for him as well, considering he doesn't need these two guys this year. They're not old per se, but they're not young either. They're both 28 and 29 respectively, I want to say. So they're kind of medium aged pitchers. I'll get a few good years out of them, but Grayson Rodriguez is still super young. Nolan Gorman is super young as well, and will fit well into that lineup to hopefully get Andrew some power. I think it is a win-win for both teams. This is one that could, I don't know, I'm worried it could backfire for me if Grayson turns into an ace, but at the same time, getting two good starting pitchers, just getting both of them in the same deal is a massive draw for me. It overhauls my rotation. And this is the fifth trade deadline in a row, fifth year in a row I've gotten a great starting pitcher at the deadline. Trading prospects for a starting pitcher. Going back, let's to the very beginning, I traded Mike Soroka for Trevor Bauer in season 1, 2018. Then back in 2019, it was a little before the deadline, but I acquired Bueller and Wheeler. And that was a deal where I gave up Sixto Sanchez, Nate Pearson, Simeon Wood Richardson. Then moving on to 2020, I acquired Hyunjin Ryu for Chisholm and Liberator, as well as a couple second rounders. Moving on 2021, I acquired Tyler Mahle for Brandon Marsh, as well as Sean Manaea for Keibert Ruiz. And then 2022, of course, I just make this deal. So 5 years in a row now, I'm trading prospects for starting pitching, and almost my entire rotation comes from that.
Yeah, I largely agree with everything that you said. I'm just going to kind of echo a couple points here. I think looking at this from Andrew's perspective, he was kind of on the Framber and Montgomery are kind of on the borderline here. Andrew had a huge loss to Yuki this past week, which we'll get into in a little bit, but I think that for the most part probably eliminated him from a realistic playoff contention. So he's looking at next year a 30-year-old Montgomery and a 29-year-old Framber, and what I think you and I had always agreed was probably the first realistic year where Andrew could compete. So in theory, he still would have had those guys in his prime. He could have kept them. He could have been part of his next great team. But at the same time, there's still guys who I think were expendable if the right offer came along to get some young pieces to help with that rebuild. And I think that it's definitely going to sting for Andrew in the short term to give up Framber and Montgomery. I mean, you mentioned the quality start streak that Framber has. I agree with you that the move to St. Louis probably helps Montgomery's value. But Grayson and Gorman are really good. Grayson, I think him and Boz right now are the top pitching prospects in the minors. Grayson would probably be up in the majors already, if not for the lat injury he already suffered. I know I'm biased as an Orioles fan, but I'm really sold on Grayson. I think he has the potential to be a front of the rotation starter. He has the potential to. I think Framber, the way he's performing right now, is about his ceiling, and I think Montgomery is a step down from Framber. I think Grayson's ceiling is higher than both of those guys. As with Gorman, he's an interesting one for me. He's hit 13 home runs in 238 plate appearances. That's a great rate. He's got a 315 OBP, which is not amazing. And he has a 31.1% K rate. He had a 34% K rate in AAA this year. For him to be, a top 100 dynasty asset, I think he really needs to work on getting that K rate down. And maybe he does as he progresses through the majors. I haven't looked at his splits by month. Maybe that number has actually gotten better. The small sample, but the K rate in August is only at 25%. So if he can, keep it around that 25% mark, I think he could be very successful. Either way, he's only 22. There's still a lot of potential here. The Cardinals really like him. He's playing every day. So I think what you're getting is kind of that short-term big boost and that certainty to your pitching staff. You added a couple pieces there at the end that really lengthen it out. And especially with the Kershaw and Bueller injuries, I really think you needed to get a couple more guys in there. While at the same time, giving up some significant pieces, but I think you have the depth to overcome it. And I think still have a really nice lineup here. You have a lot of solid second base options, even without Gorman. Getting guys like Framber and Montgomery kind of lessen the need for you to have a guy like Grayson in the first place. So I view this as a win-win deal. I think that this should work out for both sides. What I will say is I think that we're going to know pretty quickly how this turns out. I think within the next year or two. I think that there is a potential for you to lose this deal in the long run if Grayson and Gorman both really pan out, or if one of them, even if just one of them pans out, but they become like a top 50 type dynasty asset. If Grayson kind of becomes a top 5 to 10 dynasty starting pitcher, I think you lose this trade. Or you could lose this trade from a value perspective, but from the position that you are at right now, trying to win now, I think I have a hard time, even 3-5 years from now, if Grayson is that top 5-10 starting pitcher, saying like, yeah, Cam, you made a bad trade at the moment because, this is the position you're at and this is what you needed to really take that next step. So I don't think I could blame you for either way for, whatever happens here.
Yeah, no, exactly. One final thing I want to mention about this deal is that I had acquired Grayson and Gorman in the same deal back in 2020 when I sold Eugenio Suarez for both of those guys at the same time. One of my favorite deals I've ever made. Both, I think, from a value perspective, it worked out excellently for me. And using both of those guys now to get 2 top of the line starting pitchers, I feel really great about it.
Yeah, fun fact about that too, is almost exactly 2 years to the day of you making that trade. That trade occurred on August 12th. Speaking of August 12th, we had a trade on August 12th in this league. Deep Sea Devers has agreed to trade Mackenzie Gore and Dylan Carlson to Team Resnick for Trevor Rogers and Mike Soroka. I still have a hard time wrapping my head around this deal. This is just really interesting, and I could see this go both ways. But what do you think about this, Cam?
It's interesting. I think value-wise, it's pretty good. I think, yeah, Gore and Carlson are good guys for Anthony to bet on. I know Gore is hurt at the moment. Is that right? But he had been playing well.
Gore is hurt at the moment. I think they thought it was going to be a little bigger injury than it was. I think Gore should be off the IL soonish.
Okay, yeah, he's with Washington now. He got off to a great start this year. Not the best few starts since, but he's still 23. He's shown that he can pitch well. He's got a 4.12 FIP. If he cuts the walks, he could still live up to that potential he had earlier. So I think he's a great get for Anthony. Dylan Carlson has potential as well, though he's had a rough year. Trevor Rogers and Mike Soroka. Well, Mike Soroka is hurt at the moment. He's out for the entire year, correct?
Yeah, he had the Achilles issue, and then after there was either a setback with the Achilles issue or there was he had a it looks like still the Achilles. He hasn't pitched since 2020. He had a very good 2019. 2020 he has 3 starts, tears the Achilles. There was a setback recovering from it last year, and he's on a 60-day IL right now. He actually recently began a rehab assignment as of last week, it looks like. So maybe he's back this year, like in a bullpen capacity or something, but he just turned 25 like 11 days ago. So he's still very young.
Right. Yeah, and Trevor Rogers, I guess the main return, he's still only 24, so Anthony did give up 2 young starting pitchers, which is why this deal is so weird. But Rogers has just had a rough go of it this year after a brilliant rookie year last year. He looked like a just a future ace year in and year out. This year has not been that. I guess it just goes to show you can't really predict pitchers. I had seen some promising things around the turn of the All-Star break, but that those have not seemed to carry forward. So I don't know. And I know he's also hurt at the moment. I think value wise, it's fine. Timing wise, I don't get why Ruthvik made this deal. I mean, in general, it's an okay deal to make, but I don't know why. We know his lineup has no depth. He's starting who? Oscar Gonzalez in the outfield, and he doesn't still have Willie Calhoun, does he?
No, he doesn't, but he's also starting Duran, who's been a pretty big
Jaron
negative.
Duran.
And he's starting I mean, Mitch Haniger just came back from the injury, right? Like he's been hitting well,
Mhm.
but like who knows if he's going to be able to stay healthy. Acuna is day to day right now. Mountcastle's day to day.
Gleyber Torres just is not very good.
No, it's we talked about this a bit last week. It's a lineup with a lot of big names that are not really putting up good fantasy stats, but they are decent real life players. I think Jeff McNeil is the shining example of that, and that's really the issue I have with this. I think from a value perspective, I think Trevor Rogers, if he gets right, is the best player in this deal. Now, there's
Mhm.
a question as to whether or not he's going to be able to bounce back. The signs haven't been particularly encouraging this year. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen a pitcher really come on strong with a really solid first year, and then things just kind of fall apart, as they get exposed into majors, something happens, whatever. Um, but his walk rate's up, the home run rate's up, the K rate's down. It's not pretty. That being said, I'm not super high on Dylan Carlson at the moment. If you look at the Statcast page, it's pretty awful. Uh, a lot of blue. I know he's still only 23. He's a league average hitter. I mean, eight home runs, four stolen bases with exactly a 100 WRC plus. I mean, it's not like anything special that Ruthvik traded away here. His numbers were a little bit better last year at 18 home runs, two steals with a 343 OBP. Um, it's
And
just
that's
like
not bad for someone as young as he is, certainly.
no, it's not as bad for as someone who he is, right? But like, let's say he gets to even like 25 homers and five stolen bases, right? That's a solid, fantasy player. But it's one who's replaceable, especially with the kind of the OBP that he has. So, I while I like Dylan Carlson, I'm not super high on him. Mackenzie Gore concerns me a little bit. Like, yeah, he kind of came on with a flashy start of the season. He got hit hard a little bit before he landed on the IL and then got traded to Washington. I think you're right. The walk rate's high. One thing that concerns me that I've heard a lot about recently about him is that a lot of fastball is very good. His secondary pitches just haven't really been playing up too much in the majors so far, and there are tweaks and stuff that can change that. I wonder, um, if Washington can unlock some of those changes. Unlike the Padres, development system, the Nationals development system hasn't exactly produced any solid pitchers in recent memory. Um, I wonder if maybe there's some relief risk in his profile. Um, and then as for Mike Soroka, even in the let's put it this way, he kind of reminds me of Trevor Rogers in a sense that like, yeah, he had the really good 19 and then things just kind of fell apart for him. Um, and it's a question as to whether or not he can get back to that level or if he's one of those guys like Chris Paddock's a great example of that. Really good the first year, but just it never quite worked out afterwards. Or it ends up kind of just being a flash in the pan. And when you're talking about coming off a really tough Achilles injury like that, I wonder if he's ever going to fully get back on track. And not only that, from a fantasy perspective, he only had a 7.32 K per nine in his best season in 19. I just wonder if even if he does bounce back, he's not necessarily the highest upside arm because he's not going to get the strikeouts. Um, so it's weird. I think it's like these are all four players whose stocks are low. We have to see whether or not they're going to bounce back. I'm not entirely sure if they're going to bounce back. I might lean Ruthvik just because I think Trevor Rogers has actually shown it compared to the other guys, and Soroka has shown it. Although I think I'm the most concerned about him of any of the four. But I'll echo your critique of Ruthvik's move and why he was so insistent on getting some starting pitchers. If you look at what his roster looks like right now, he has 12 starting pitchers. Plus, he has Roansy Contreras and DL Hall in the minors. Roansy is now has passed his innings limit, so he's sitting on Ruthvik's MPI. He has to be promoted at some point. And DL Hall just made his major league debut on Saturday, and he's going to get called up by the Orioles again later this season in a bullpen role. So I don't think he's necessarily going to blow through that innings limit this year, but that's certainly something to keep an eye on. The reality is that you don't need 12 starting pitchers. I have 10 starting pitchers, and sometimes I'm like, hey, maybe this might even be one too many, right? And maybe Ruthvik is a bigger plan where he's going to trade for some hitters, but he seems pretty insistent on this idea that you don't need any bench bats. He's just going to roll with the guys that he has. And I'm fine with that if his whole logic was like, hey, I have a lineup of really, really good players, and I don't want to bench any of them. And you know what? I'll pick up a bench bat or two occasionally, if I really need one, but, I'd rather load up on the pitching. That's fine. But he's starting guys like Jarren Duran. He's starting guys like Oscar Gonzalez. He's starting guys, like Vaughn Grissom. And yes, some of those guys are playing very well. Grissom's looked really good since he's come up. Gonzalez has had some good games, but those guys aren't like established guys with track records that you feel good about trusting for 6 weeks between now and the end of the season. And Ruthvik's told me, like, hey, like, some people have holes in their lineups or they're kind of banking on some younger players. And yeah, that's true. But the difference between, the rest of the playoff teams and him, I feel like, is that those guys have at least have backup plans for some of those young guys to ensure that, they're not just solely, relying on them to be the end all be all, sole piece. They have multiple bench bats, they have multiple players who play the position, it's not just, they don't have to start those guys every day. They could pick the matchups. So
exactly. And he says some teams do have holes in their lineup, but like the top teams don't really. And he's pretty close, and he's a couple moves away from being one of those top teams. I don't think he should have holes in his lineup. Like, you don't, like, for example, I don't have holes in my lineup. You don't have holes in your lineup. Erik doesn't really have, he has guys he's trying out, but he doesn't have holes in his lineup, and he has bench guys to make up for it. Jake doesn't have holes in his lineup. The top four teams don't have anything like that going on.
Exactly. And that's where I started to get concerned here. And I wonder, it's the same criticism I had last week. If he's not going to add hitting, in good hitting, I think this team's maximize its ceiling. And then it reaches a point where Ruthvik has to decide, does he actually trade some of this pitching to get hitting, or does he just sit on his hands and that be that? And he's shown his willingness to trade some of these guys. He's traded away Nestor Cortez, he's traded away Mackenzie Gore now, but he's traded them all for pitching. And at some point, it's like your rotation is good enough, and you have enough depth, and you have enough options where you need to consolidate it and build a full team. You can't win by just building one position. That's never going to work. There's always going to be a limit to the upside of that. So,
I guess the last thing, just to kind of sum it all up, he has, I think this trade names wise was more than fine for Ruthvik. I think just objectively names wise, he got a good value for these assets. But I think if you're going to be trading some young high ceiling guys, go after your team's biggest need, not something. And especially when you're currently in 7th place, tied for 6th, you could very easily be 5th by the end of the year. So you're in the playoff mix, clearly. Go after your big need, not going after injured but interesting pitchers.
Exactly. Now, the one thing I'll say then is I wonder if this move signifies him, thinking like, hey, um, I don't think I'm going to make the playoffs this year, or maybe I do think I'm going to make the playoffs, but I'm not really going to make so much noise. Rather than make a big push, to try and do something this year, maybe I'm going to go and acquire some assets that I think are interesting moving forward. And I think that's fine, but why not do it with a hitter? Why do you have to do it with a pitcher? Knowing that you already have the depth there, and it's the rule of diminishing returns. The 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th starting pitcher makes much less of a difference for his team than it would be, say, upgrading from Jaron Duran to even like a top 150 dynasty asset. So um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's. I think you and I are both on the same page here. I Ruthvik Ruthvik listened to the podcast last week and was like, "Damn, he got roasted by us," and then went out and made this move. So I'm curious if he makes a move in response to us roasting him again this week. But we shall see. We've talked a while about Ruthvik. You want to move on to the next deal?
Yeah, let's do it. One more deal was made this week, not a large one, but definitely an interesting one. Erik traded Ezekiel Duran to Anthony for a future second all the way in 2027. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think this is a interesting one for Anthony. Duran has shown some upside. The I don't love the K to walk rates, 5.4 to 25.7% this year, but I think Duran can be an interesting piece. He's gotten a little bit of hype. He's a 50 FV on Fangraphs, 62nd overall going into the season. I think that this is a decent gamble for Anthony. He's trying to acquire some younger pieces. For the cost of a 2027 second. I don't think it's a ton to pay. And yeah, I think for Erik, he probably, if I had to guess, would be at bats here. Duran has 148 plate appearances, so Erik would have had to kept him or lose him. Um, for nothing, and better for Erik to get something from a player that he just doesn't have room for as he makes this playoff push.
Exactly. Yeah, basically, yeah, Duran was gonna have to get cut. Anthony decided to, I guess, skip the line, skip the waiver wire, um, um, not have to worry about having to claim him or anything like that, and get a guy who's got a high ceiling. Um, and yeah, no, I think it works for both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's that was a trade for this week. I'm sure Cam and I are gonna have a ton to talk about next week, but those are already some pretty significant moves. We're gonna get into our trade deadline preview in a second. But before we do that, perhaps the biggest news to come out of baseball this week was the Fernando Tatis Jr. suspension. That was certainly not something I saw coming. I expected that I'd have him back sometime this week, honestly. He had started his rehab assignment. He played 4 games before the suspension came down. I saw this interesting question on Twitter, and before I kind of get into the impact it has on my roster, I'm curious what you think about this from a value perspective. Now with Tatis having the wrist injury, which will obviously be healed, presumably, assuming he's not hopping on a motorcycle in between now and when the suspension ends, and he has his truck suspension. He had the shoulder issue in the past. Is Tatis still a top 5 dynasty asset in your mind? Top 10, top 15, outside the top 15? Where would you put him?
That's a tough question. I
Yeah.
mean, I guess really, who would have taken Fernando Tatis busted for steroids as on their 2022 MLB bingo card? I mean, a lot of weird stuff has happened this year, but this really came out of nowhere. Is he the best player since Robinson Cano to get busted for steroids? Maybe even the best since A-Rod?
Yeah. I mean, I
I
think
mean,
by the time,
Ryan Braun had won an MVP, but
yeah, I think maybe since A-Rod then.
yeah, I guess I never answered your question though.
Yeah.
But I don't really know. I guess first and foremost, the question this begs is if Tatis is playing clean now, how much worse of a hitter is he? Is this something that will impact his performance? Is his baseline level lower now that he's been busted? And was it artificially high before? Additionally, now he's going to have missed a full season due to injury and this. He'll be missing the start of next season. So, yeah, I don't know where to put him. I guess out of the top 10 would be harsh. Out of the top 15 would be harsh. But I don't know. That 10 to 15 range seems about right considering all this. I don't know.
I think I'd put him somewhere in that 6 to 10 range, but probably towards the bottom of it. I think it's the combination of there are other guys like Julio Rodriguez who have popped up who I think deserve to be in that like top conversation. And also just the stuff that's gone on with Tatis. I think like you said, it's hard to quantify the effect that the PEDs have had. I still think he's an immensely talented player either way. And I don't think he's suddenly going to turn into a pumpkin. The other hand, or the other thing I could say about this, where you could see the benefit too, is he did deal with some shoulder issues last year. He's dealt with the wrist issues this year. Maybe he comes back next year and he's fully healthy. Maybe the shoulder issues are more behind him. Maybe the wrist feels a lot better. Maybe he's not playing through some pain, which maybe he would have had to have done the rest of this year just to be able to get back, before the season ended. So I could see some benefits. It's going to be tough for him. It's not going to be an easy path. And, he definitely needs to mature. But I think the talent is still there. And I think he's, I don't think this is the end for him. And there have been examples of players who've come back after the PEDs and done very well. Nelson Cruz, after he had his PED stuff, that was when he started hitting the best in his career. And now everybody thinks of Nelson Cruz very differently than they did at the time of PED. So I'm not saying it can't be done, but there's definitely, some work that he has to do to really get things back to where he was. But I'm still confident in him in the long term, but I'm a little concerned that he's a knucklehead. But I'm hoping that he's just a 23-year-old that matures a little bit. Remember, man, who was I talking about this with? It might have been you, or maybe it was Greg, about how they like Manny Machado now. They're like, Manny's a more mature player. Things are better with him. He kind of looks a little more like a leader. Do you remember Manny when he came up and he threw the bat at Josh Donaldson and he got in a fight with the Yordano Ventura and there was other issues. He had some issues with the Dodgers when he got traded there. He was young, he was immature, but he's grown out of it. So it just it's hard to know.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it is for sure hard to know. But yeah, so we've talked about the impact on his future, but what about the impact on the remainder of your season?
Yes.
Owning him and now not being able to IL stash him, which is massive, and then not being able to bring him back into your lineup like you thought you would.
Yes. So I'm not as this sounds weird, but I'm not as concerned from the perspective that I won't be able to have his production for the rest of the year. I've gotten to this point without his production. My team's been on a roll pretty much for the last 2 months. I haven't had too many concerns. A lot of the guys who I had who were struggling at the beginning of the season are starting to turn it around, in particular Max Muncy, Nick Castellanos. And while pretty much so, I actually did get another whammy when Michael Brantley got ruled out for the year, but I was expecting that. But Springer's going to be back soon. And looking at the rest of my offense now, I'd still have a full complement of bats that I'm comfortable with, a full lineup plus 2 bench bats. While his production is certainly going to be missed, I do think I have enough offensively to get by. We also didn't know what he was going to look like when he came back. As I alluded to earlier, maybe he'd be playing through some pain. Maybe the timing wouldn't be there because he hadn't played in a while. So, maybe he would have come back and wouldn't have been as strong initially. So maybe, it actually could have hurt me in some ways. But the bigger issue, as you mentioned, is the fact that he's no longer IL eligible. He's still sitting on my IL at the moment because I haven't had to make a move to activate him. But the second I need to make an ad drop or the second that I make a trade, um, I'm gonna have to move him off the IL. Which means I'm essentially going to be playing with a 29-man roster for the rest of the season because there's no way I cut Tatis and I'm not going to trade Tatis. That's out of the question. I We could see this affecting my trade deadline plans. For example, I would love to, add another, solid reliever, behind Helsley, Gallegos, Graveman, and Neris. But now instead of just weighing the, hey, I give up this draft pick or this prospect to go get the reliever, it's also, hey, I also have to open up this roster spot, another roster spot to activate Tatis and put him on the roster. And it would be one thing right now if, it was kind of like last season where I was comfortably the number one seed. I wasn't terribly concerned about where I would finish the season at. And I thought I could maybe roll into the playoffs here without having to face you or Erik in the first round. Now I'm fighting for the ability to have a bye. I play 3 playoff teams the last 3 weeks of the regular season, and I think my matchup against Jake next week will knock one of us out of contention for the number 2 seed. So it's tough. I don't know what I'm gonna do. This certainly threw a wrench. I think this might make it less likely that I go out and acquire some lesser players than I might have otherwise. This is not going to preclude me from, if a good opportunity comes up to trade for a top 50, top 100 dynasty asset that I really like, it's not going to preclude me from doing that. Because at the end of the day, I think the benefits of that outweigh the cons. But I'm not going to go and acquire some random reliever, some random bench bat, some random back of the rotation starter, and then go and activate Tatis. So it's a challenge. It's a fun challenge, in the sense that I haven't had to deal with something like this before, and it's always fun to kind of have to play on my toes and deal with different things. But it's really a huge bummer.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll figure something out. Yeah, again, that matchup with Jake is going to be huge, especially considering you have the tiebreaker over me at the moment, but you don't have the tiebreaker over Jake at the moment. So that would, yeah. So even tying would be detrimental for you, considering how tough the rest of your schedule is.
Right.
But yeah, no, Tatis, a big loss in a lot of ways. I'm curious to see what you do at the trade deadline, and let's use that as a transition into talking about the trade deadline. We've got another week until that. It's this coming Sunday?
Friday,
exactly?
I believe. Friday night. Friday night at midnight. We have 5 days from the time of recording. Roughly, it is about 3 o'clock on Monday when as we were talking. So whatever, 9 plus 105 hours roughly.
Gotcha. Okay, so this will be yeah, so it will happen by the time the next episode comes up. So a lot will happen. Maybe even some stuff will happen before the time this episode goes onto YouTube. But yeah, a lot.
I can almost guarantee it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, a lot to talk about. You said you had some questions prepared to kind of for discussion.
Yeah, so Cam and I last week kind of answered kind of into natural flow of discussion, kind of a lot of the questions that I was gonna pose for us this week. Maybe going more specific team by team. So rather than spending all that time kind of repeating a lot of the things that we said, I decided to put together a list of questions similar to one that I did for 2022 preseason predictions. Unlike those, I think some of these are probably going to have less right or wrong answers, and I think they might just more be kind of spring up some good talking points. Although there's a couple over-unders in here, and a couple of numbers I want you to describe this stuff. But without further ado, I have 9 questions. And unless you have peeked at the spreadsheet, I don't think you know what these questions are. So let's go ahead. Number 1, what team makes the most trades at the deadline. So when I say at the deadline, I mean in between this time of recording and the deadline Friday at midnight.
Yeah, so I am gonna go out on a bit of a limb. I know last year we were surprised when it was Conor. I'm going to go with a team that's in a bit of a similar spot as Conor. I'm going to say Jake. Jake has been very aggressive as of late. He's reached out to me a few times. I know he's reached out to a few other teams as well. I already agreed to a trade with him last week that won't count towards this, but I know he's looking to get rid of a starting pitcher. Maybe swap some things around. I like his lineup a lot. I like his team a lot, really in general, but there's still some room for improvement as there is for all of us. Jeremy Pena has been kind of terrible ever since the first couple months of the year. Maybe he's someone who could be upgraded in that lineup. But I mean, with Michael Harris playing the way he is, this lineup looks incredible. But at the same time, I know he wants to make trades. He seems to be the most aggressive team, the team that seems to be initiating the most things at the moment, as far as I can tell. So I'm gonna go with Jake.
Yeah, I was gonna say Jake as well. I think that he has a interesting combination here where I think he thinks he has too many players on a major league roster and he'd like to consolidate some of that depth. While at the same time, I think he also has the prospect capital that he can trade to go and make some major league upgrades if he wanted to. So I think that he has a little more open-ended strategy, which should give him some more options. And I do think that he'll be able to pull off some trades as a result. I will say a lot of teams, I think like me and you, for example, have already pulled off a lot of our biggest moves. You know, I got Mookie Betts, I had the big Jorge Polanco deal a couple weeks ago. You just got Framber Montgomery. Erik hasn't been as loud on deadline day in recent years. I think Conor lacks some of the assets necessary to make the push that he did last year. And he does have, he did give Verlander. He cashed in his one big trade chip of Ezekiel Tovar a few weeks ago to go get him. And I think Ruthvik is going to make some moves as well. I don't think he's going to be quite at the level of Jake. But if I had to name a team not Jake, just because we both named Jake, I'd say Ruthvik and Nick could be making some moves. I don't know if they're all going to be big moves, but I think I could see him making some more kind of tweaks around the edges, whereas I think Jake is ready to strike hot with like a really significant move. Let's flip this around. What team is the most surprisingly quiet at the deadline?
Now that's a good question. Surprisingly quiet. I don't know how to really answer that, but I think the answer could be you based on what we talked about earlier about Tatis. I don't know what big moves are out there for you, and really it's always surprising if you're quiet, and even surprisingly quiet by your standards would mean making 3 trades instead of 12 in the next 4 days. So I think I'm gonna go with you, especially considering your little roster crunch.
Yeah, I was gonna say me as well. And I thought I was gonna be throwing you off guard a little bit by saying that. I guess we really are starting to think alike. But yeah, it is me. For all the reasons I just said with Tatis, that was kind of our segue into the trade deadline discussion here. Again, I think that it's going to take a big move to kind of make me make a move. Maybe in terms of the type of player I acquire, maybe there is a big move or two. But I also think it's just as likely that there's not a big move or two. But the real difference here is there's not going to be like 4, 5, 6 like small trades at the margins that I might have otherwise made. That being said, the one thing I'll caution is if I do make that one big trade that let's say somebody offers me a top 50 dynasty asset and I think it's too good to turn down, and then Tatis, I do have to activate Tatis at that point. Then it's a little bit of a different calculation because I've already factored that in. When I'm making these smaller trades now, I have to recognize that Tatis is already on my roster, but that trade itself will not be the thing that puts Tatis back on my roster. So maybe that makes me more likely to to buy some of these smaller pieces that I've mentioned. Maybe I don't want as much, but we'll see. I think, as you know as well, I'm very happy with the state of my farm system right now. I'm very happy with the state of my major league team. I've been on a roll for the past 7 weeks. I felt like so. Even if the opportunity presents itself, I don't know if I really have to make a move. I don't feel the desperation necessarily. So we'll see. It's an interesting one, but let's go on to the next question here. Which major league player do we expect to get dealt that does not get dealt?
Now that's interesting. I don't know who we're expecting to get dealt. I mean, really, the thing about this league is that anyone could get dealt at any time. I guess looking through teams, Trey Turner seems to be someone who's getting shopped a bit. There seems to be some buzz around him, but I could see him not getting dealt. I think it'd take a too big of a return for any team to get him. So maybe he's a good answer for that. Other than that, I guess it is hard to say. You're expecting Jared Kelenic to get dealt. I could say he's certainly open to discussion. I have been discussing him, but he fits this answer pretty well also as someone who's a little bit expected to get dealt, but not necessarily going to.
Yeah, I think Trey Turner is a good answer for the sake of being a little different here. I'm gonna say Kelenic, and I'll talk a little more about it. I think Kelenic makes a lot of sense for you to trade. In the sense that you're competing now. Kelenic doesn't look like he's going to contribute for you much of any this year, and in fact, you could kind of have a Tatis-like problem with me where he gets promoted, as one of the September call-ups, for example, and then you have to roster him. You can't just keep him on your non-prospect inactive spot during the playoffs, and then it almost becomes a little bit of a detriment to own him at that point. And then you have to weigh what you think of him moving forward, what you expect he's going to perform like in the future, versus, having to carry him for the rest of the season. And I'm not sure what that calculus is. I think there's a lot of the fantasy beat writers who are starting to adjust their predictions and are like, maybe he could bounce back, but maybe he's not going to be like the top 10, top 20, dynasty asset they thought he could be. Maybe he's more in the back end of the top 100. Maybe he's just a top 150 guy. It's hard to tell. And you've had some experiences this year with guys like Joe Adele. I just noticed you got rid of Jose Barrero. You had to put him on waivers. Who was the other big prospect you just Vidal Brujan you got rid of, right? Where maybe you could have dealt them a little earlier and extracted some value, but you decided to hold on. You lost that gamble. Where I'm curious if that makes you a little more willing to deal him. At the same time, Kelenic has been your guy in a way that Adele and Brujan and others, have not been. So I wonder if you're going to give it a little more time. I wouldn't blame you for giving it a little more time, but I wonder if at the position that you're at, that even if you want to, you're going to have a hard time really rostering him. And then the other consideration is, well, what's somebody willing to give up for him? Because, for example, if you're just going to get the Michael Fulmer price for Kelenic, or sorry, the Joe Adele price for Jared Kelenic, which is Michael Fulmer, I don't think that's worth it for you. So we'll see. But I'll say Kelenic.
Yeah, there is something special about Kelenic being a first rounder for me in the first ever prospect draft, seeing him ride all the way up to number one prospect from being a rookie draft pick, as opposed to Brujan and Adele were acquired in trades. Barrero was a free agent pickup. So something about being a draft pick does kind of add to the intrigue and kind of riding him through the minors, in terms of my, I guess, my bond with him per se.
No, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. We'll see where that goes. But let's flip this question around again. Which major league player who we do not expect to get dealt actually gets dealt?
Ooh, I was hoping this would be one of the questions. And that's Uh that's fun. I know we've kind of discussed guys like this before. We've discussed Mike Trout in this context quite a bit. Um, I don't know. Part of me wants to say that someone will pay up for Kevin Gosman, even though Anthony said he's not available. But at the same time, I think the top teams maybe feel set in starting pitchers. Maybe not Conor, but Conor doesn't have what it takes to get Gosman at the moment. Um, I don't know. There really are a lot of ways that this could go. I kind of want to say a bat for those reasons I was just talking about. Um, what about Corey Seager? I could see Corey Seager moving. I know the Bellies have been. Um, I know I've had talks with them. I know a few other teams have been in talks with them. I know a lot of their deals just kind of come out of nowhere. They definitely seem to be more willing to trade for prospects than they ever have been at this point. Corey Seager is maybe. I will. Yeah, I don't know. I have a feeling Seager, a team will pay up for a shortstop.
That's interesting. I think they're a great pick for a surprise team to watch at the deadline. They, like you said, they've made some moves kind of coming out of nowhere. They are a little more willing to trade for prospects. I don't really get the sense that anybody's untouchable on their roster for the right price. And,
Mhm.
I think that you, me, Erik, Jake, a couple of these other, competing teams actually have the prospect capital to go out and get somebody like Seager. Not that all of us necessarily have a need for Seager, but I think there are teams that could go out and get him. One interesting team I'd say maybe would be fun for a Corey Seager deal is Ruthvik. Um,
Mm.
Imagine if Ruthvik trades some of this young starting pitching that he has at the major league level, maybe attaches one of his lesser bats and is like, hey, give me Corey Seager. Um, I think that makes a ton of sense for him. I think that can make a ton of sense for the Bellies. It would alleviate some of Ruthvik's pitching depth that he doesn't need. And I think it could be a win-win for both sides. I know the Bellies in the past have had interest in DL Hall from him because I know that Ruthvik was discussing a Chris Bassett deal with them way back in the day before I traded Brandon Drury and a couple prospects for Bassett. So that's a really good one. That's a nice out of the box answer that I had not thought of. Uh, I'm maybe this is the lazy one. Um, but I've kind of had a feeling all along that this was actually going to kind of happen when it all went down. But I think Kevin Gosman does end up getting dealt. I think someone's going to be desperate enough where they're going to not overpay, but I think they're going to overwhelm Anthony with an offer, and I think Anthony's going to show a little bit of willingness uh, to move off of him. As I always say, deadline spur action. So you never know. I could certainly see something happening that really changes the calculation for him. Um, but another name I'm going to throw out here, just for the sake of not just giving the obvious answer, I think Kyle Schwarber might move.
Mm.
I think that he is kind of like Framber and Jordan Montgomery, right there on the border, age-wise, as somebody that could be kept for the long term for Andrew and be very successful. But at the same time, he is 29 right now. He'll be 30 at the start of next season. He's hit 34 home runs already in 472 plate appearances. Surprisingly, come with 6 stolen bases too. The OBP is a bit low; it's only 314. But he does have a history of some higher OBPs. And that lower OBP is perfectly fine if he's going to hit like 45 home runs. Maybe he even reaches 50. So, I could certainly see a team that needs power, ponying up to go get him. And because of the low OBP, I wonder if, the price isn't going to be as high as, say, somebody like, obviously Mookie Betts is a lot better than Schwarber, but like the point I'm making is that he's affordable, so I think Kyle Schwarber is an interesting name to look out for, and I low-key would not be surprised if he's dealt.
And that's an interesting one. I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Who was the best major league player dealt at the deadline? And
Best
again,
major
deadline
league.
meaning in between now and the actual deadline.
Who best major league player dealt at the deadline? Um, I don't know. I mean, my surprise guys, those surprise guys would probably be better than just about any player who does indeed get dealt. Um, that's tricky. I could see Joe Musgrove being the best player getting dealt if Ruthvik trades him for a
Wow.
bat. Um, that'd be a big move right there. Um I could see Nestor Cortez moving again. He'd be an answer there. I don't have a solid answer. Um,
I'm probably just gonna write down the best player that you say, and so far it's Musgrove. Um,
yeah.
I think
What about
Musgrove's an interesting one to me because I kind of have similar thoughts about him where I think he's the type of guy Ruthvik could go trade for an established bat and not really feel like he's losing much into rotation, especially because at the time he acquired Musgrove, DeGrom was still out. There's a couple other starting pitcher moves that he hadn't made, but if he trusts DeGrom's health, he suddenly has DeGrom, Bieber, Logan Webb, maybe he's trusting Jose Barrios to be that number 4, number 5 starter. And all of a sudden, I'm not saying Musgrove is expendable. I think Musgrove is a top 10 fantasy starting pitcher, but maybe Ruthvik feels like it's a good time to strike on a bat. Um, that's an interesting one. I like that answer a lot.
Yeah, no, I do as well. There's one other guy I think is better, but
Oh,
because I'm in talks about this player, I'm gonna keep that name under wraps.
that's interesting. I I'm gonna go with another starting pitcher here. From a team that we just talked about earlier. I think Tony Gonsolin could very easily get dealt.
Huh.
He's having a fantastic year. Uh, definitely just another example of, a Dodgers starter that kind of comes out of nowhere to be really great. Um, I could see this being kind of a sell high opportunity for him in a sense that he has a 203 BABIP. He has a 224 ERA, but a 347 FIP and a 382 xFIP. Um, and I don't think he's a 224 ERA starting pitcher. I think he's more of a low two or a high twos ERA, maybe low threes type of guy. I don't think he's as bad as his FIP or xFIP suggests. Um, but I wonder if Daniel and Matt kind of take advantage of the hype that Gonsolin has right now and are able to move him at the max of his value and really just accelerate this rebuild here and pick up a couple pieces, that can really help them moving forward. I just, it makes a lot of sense to me. And, if Anthony isn't going to trade Gosman, I think Gonsolin's probably the next best starting pitcher that could realistically be acquired. And he's also 4 years younger than Gosman. So I could see, even if Gosman is available, I could see a team that is willing to give up more for Gonsolin, knowing that they're going to buy more of his prime than they are Gosman's.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good. Interesting one as well.
Yeah. We're almost done here with the questions. Who was the best prospect dealt at the deadline?
That's a good one. That's what I was kind of assuming the next question would be. Um, I'm gonna ignore my own prospects. I could see if Erik wants to go after someone big, then I could see someone like Ellie De La Cruz being on the table. I guess I feel like a prospect who's already been traded is more likely to get traded again.
Yeah.
So maybe he'd be more likely to trade De La Cruz than someone like Noelvi Marte or Jason Dominguez. Um, And De La Cruz is kind of, if he thinks he wants to sell him at his peak, and if he wants to go after a superstar, then that'd be a great piece to bring back either a great starting pitcher or a great bat.
Yeah, Ellie De La Cruz was certainly one I was strongly considering saying too, based on the intel that I have.
Ooh,
Um,
Intel, huh?
Intel, yes. Uh,
Very interesting.
and I certainly think he fits the profile. I think what a lot of teams want to do, at the deadline is you want to trade some of these prospects at their peak. So you're certainly looking at guys who have really popped off this year who you're not necessarily sure, can keep up with that helium that they've gotten. So, like when I traded Kobe Mayo in the offseason, for example, or that's the one example I could think of off the top of my head. Um, so I'm not going to say Ellie De La Cruz because you said him, but I certainly agree with that line of thinking. You know what? Here's a fun one. I think Conor can move Diego Cartaya. Um,
Ooh,
I don't
yeah, I think
think
that's a good choice.
that's a good choice. I it, I think the reality of the situation with Conor is that his team is probably not quite at the level of the top teams, but there's a lot of talented pieces here, and we saw what he did last season. He's willing to be aggressive. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't quite have the assets that he did last year to go out and maybe make a trade, but I think his best prospect is Diego Cartaya. And if he finds a starting pitcher that's really interesting to him, or a bat that's really interested to him, I could see him floating Cartaya as a trade chip. And I think the reality is that he's a dynasty catcher prospect. I feel like they're always a little more finicky than some of the other bat prospects. And the threshold for being like an elite, catcher option that you would really miss is pretty high. Even if Cartaya only settles in that 6 to 10 range at catcher, I don't think Conor really misses him. He has to be a top 5 catcher for Conor to really miss him. So I think Cartaya could be moved. And I think he could certainly be the best prospect that is moved. They are
Yeah,
both,
I
I
mean,
believe, top 5-ish, top 10-ish prospects on Baseball America. So,
yeah,
um,
I mean, now Jonah Heim is a top 6 to 10 catcher, and no one wants him at all. So if that's or if that's Diego Cartaya in 5 years, then Connor would not miss him.
exactly. Yeah, I think that's so it's a really good perspective there is to convert it to a major league example here.
Mhm.
I'm going to slightly alter the way this last question is worded, or one of these. We have 3 more questions. These should be shorter, but number of trades in between the time of recording and the deadline. Over under 16. 16 was the number that we had last year. In between and over the last 5 days. We roughly have 5 days in between now and the deadline.
I'm going to take the under. I think I feel fairly confident about the under. I know a lot can happen on the final day, but I know I feel largely done. I know you feel largely done. I'm not sure what improvements Erik will need to make. Um, so I think it'll largely be driven by Jake and Ruthvik, perhaps, and maybe with some surprises thrown in, and maybe some little ones, smaller trades. But I feel okay about the under here.
Yeah, I'm going to take the over. I think unlike last year, I think there are a lot of teams kind of bunched in the 2 to 6 rate. I'm kind of assuming for the moment that Erik is probably going to get the bye. I think his win or the 1 seed. I think his win over Conor, coupled with the rest of his schedule, really makes it difficult for anybody else to realistically take over. But I still think the race to get the number 2 seed is still very hot. I still think there's 3 teams there. Um, that realistically have a shot for it. And then I also think you have 3 teams right below that, and Conor, Ruthvik, and Yuki, who are fighting for a playoff spot, or fighting for two playoff spots, I should say. And I think that we're going to see enough moves where we will hit the over, just because things are a little closer than last year, where I think things were a little more. We kind of knew where teams were going to end up. It was just a matter of what the exact order was. So I'm going to say the over. Um, Next question. Number of players slash picks that are dealt in the biggest trade. So whatever trade has the most. I probably should have searched up which one was the biggest. Last year at the deadline, interestingly, leading up to the deadline, there really was not a bunch of huge quantity trades last year. A lot of I think like 5 or 6 was the highest, interestingly.
Yeah, I think I'll take over 6, but not by a ton. I'm gonna say 8. 8 feels about right, maybe. Just with picks being tacked on. I know, I mean, it doesn't count towards this, but I just made a trade with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 involved. So I think it'll tie that.
Gotcha. I'm gonna take the over as well. I'm gonna say 10. I
Ooh.
think there's one just massive trade sitting out there that we just don't see coming. And I feel like in previous deadlines, just kind of looking back historically, we've had some really just massive trades go down that have had, like a five going one way, 5 going the other way, stuff like that. So, it only takes one trade for, that to happen. And I think we're going to see that one trade. So I'll say 10. Last one, number of combined players and picks dealt between the time of recording and the deadline.
That's a good one. If I think they're going to be about, let's call it 14 trades, or per deal, I'm going to say, let's go 55.
Interesting. I was gonna say 75.
Wow, that is big
I'm saying
difference
there's going to be
there.
roughly 18 deals, and I'm multiplying that by 4 and then rounding up to 75 because I like that number better than 72. It just feels
All
more right.
right.
Um,
We have maybe the largest gap in our answers in any of these questions we've done on the podcast.
yeah, it's interesting. Even the answers that you gave that like I didn't give, like for the most part, I like agreed with them. I just wanted to kind of pick something different for the sake of conversation here. But these last 3 questions, or especially this last one, we had some differences. So it's always fun when we differ. I'm sure we'll go back and review, especially the over under ones, on next week's episode very briefly. But yeah, is there anything else you would like to say about the trade deadline? Before we move on, this is the last chance we'll have before the trade deadline occurs. The next episode will be after the trade deadline.
No, I think that's all I have to say about that. Just curious to see what goes on. I know whatever happens is going to be a shock. We even ourselves will probably make a deal that we're not remotely expecting at the moment. So it's that's what's great about it. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's the number of big trades that I've made that have just kind of come on a spur of the moment, just like, hey, maybe I should inquire on this player, or somebody puts somebody on the block, and the next thing I know, I have that player. I think getting Tatis a couple years back is the greatest example of that. EBO put him on the block, and within 24 hours, he was on my team. So, you never know what's going to happen. It's going to be a fun deadline, as all the deadlines are. And yeah, let's jump into the matchups from last week. I think the logical one to start out with here would either be Erik v Conor or Yuki v Andrew. Which one do you want to start with?
Let's start out with Erik v Conor. That was but the biggest matchup of them all. This is one that Conor had a lead for a lot of the week. Both teams played pretty well, but in the end, Erik got the win, and he pitched really, really well this week, even if his bats were just kind of same old, same old.
Yeah, I think Erik's pitching is the strength of his team. He's built a really nice rotation. I think even despite the down week with the OBP, which interestingly, this is like the second down week with the OBP, or third down week, I should say, with the OBPs. 15 homers and 41 ribbies are both pretty solid numbers. He gets a huge one against Conor. For in terms of the playoffs, this is huge. As I kind of alluded to earlier, I think this was the last best chance for Erik to really lose a matchup before he plays you. And potentially take himself out of the 1 seed. I know his lead has narrowed over the last couple weeks. But even if he loses to you during rivalry week to end the season, I'm still a game back of him, so he would win the tiebreaker even if I win out. Even if Jake wins out, he still needs Erik to lose more than one game because he's a game and a half back of Erik now. Ditto with you. Although you beating Erik would give him one of the losses that he needs. So I think that effectively makes Erik the 1 seed. Conor was in that grouping with you and Jake going into this week, who were a game and a half back of Erik. He's now 2.5 games back, and he's a game and a half back of the number 2 seed, which I currently occupy. I think this probably takes him out of the race for the bye. But I still think he's very much in the race to get the 3 or 4 seed. It would certainly be nice for him, I'm sure, to get one of those seeds to own the tiebreaker in the first round, and to lessen the chances of him having to play Erik, if he does win that first round matchup. So, yeah, definitely significant in that regard. But anything else you have to say about this matchup? I'm sure you have a matchup MVP you'd like to pick.
Yes, so I will say Erik does lose more weird ones than some of the other top teams a lot of the time, so I wouldn't say he's locked up the one. For example, he already lost to EBO just a couple weeks ago. So I know he lost to Alex late in the year last year. So he does lose weird ones from time to time. That being said, yeah, he's certainly gotten rid of his biggest opponent before his rivalry week matchup against me. And especially I know Conor, if Conor had one of his ridiculous pitching weeks that he does every couple weeks with a sub-2 ERA, he could have really pushed Erik and even pulled off that win. But I will go ahead and give matchup MVP. It's another tricky one.
No pressure.
And I don't love giving matchup MVP to a 1-start pitcher, but Dylan Cease was just really good again. He made a great start, 8 Ks in 6 innings, limited the walks to only 2 walks, which is better than he normally does. He only allowed 1 run. I will say Corbin Burns as well had a great week. Lance Lynn struck out 12, but didn't. Was only great in one of his starts. And then hitting wise, there wasn't a ton to be thrilled about, but Christian Walker had a good week for him. But let's give Dylan Cease another matchup MVP. He's earned it. That is his 4th.
Yeah, no, I think that is certainly the right answer. Anything else you'd like to add before we jump to the next matchup?
No, let's jump to the other one between two playoff contenders. Two playoff contenders, not playoff teams, but that is Yuki holding on to that 6th seed with a close win over Andrew.
Yeah, Yuki's pitching went ham yesterday.
God, yeah, it did. I mean, just looking at let's look at just Sunday to start. Yuki 20 2/3 innings, 0.58 WHIP, 19 strikeouts, 2.61 ERA. And that was huge because the WHIP was very close. One of the categories that went down to the wire. He also got he got 2 quality starts, which flipped that category, and when the strikeouts flipped that category as well. Yeah, both teams pitched great. I think league wide it was kind of a down hitting week. I would say a lot of teams didn't hit amazingly. And some of the pitching numbers for most teams just kind of looked like this. But yeah, what a week. What a week for Yuki. I wouldn't even say Andrew played bad because he did score 46 runs. They both tied with a high number of doubles. And Andrew had good pitching rate sets as well. But good week for Yuki to keep himself in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with pretty much everything that you just said. Clutch week for Yuki on the pitching side. The 12 saves is insane. I didn't think Andrew performed bad or anything, but Yuki just kind of got the best of him in a lot of these categories. It was close all week. I think that big Sunday for Yuki really cemented it. Yeah, I think like you said, I think this keeps Yuki in the playoff hunt. I believe he's still tied with Ruthvik. He's only a half game behind Conor. Yuki does have a tough test this week. He's playing Erik, which I guess really this is basically a must-win game for him because had he lost to Andrew, I mean, I think it's more likely than not that he loses to Erik, and then suddenly he's probably out of the hunt or maybe still in the hump, but has a low percent chance of making it. So he kept himself in it. As for Andrew, I think this effectively takes him out of the playoff hunt. He is now, let me pull up the exact standings. He is now 2.5 games back of Yuki and Ruthvik for that 6th seed. I don't see it happening for him this year, but a very solid performance by him so far this year at 7-9-1. I think he's kind of performing at the level that we thought he would. Who's the matchup MVP?
Yeah, so let's give matchup MVP to another pitcher, Drew Rasmussen. He was a rare guy. You see kind of get a ton of hype in the off season and the build up to the season, despite there not having been hype for him the previous season. But I kind of saw his stock rise and rise throughout the offseason, and he has paid off. He's had a good season, and this week particularly, he threw 8 perfect innings against the Orioles. Ended up giving up a run in the 9th, but he only allowed the 1 base runner, giving him a brilliant 0.12 whip for the week on 108 ERA. He got the quality start, and all of those were very, very important for Yuki's pitching line this week. I'll mention Josh Rojas had a good week, and if we want to look at closers, the reason he got all those saves, Camilo Doval got 3 saves, 3 perfect innings, only allowing just one walk and no hits. So the bullpen did its job in a near historic week.
Yeah, absolutely. No, good for Yuki to stay in it. What matchup do we want to talk about next?
That is a good question. Not too many of the remaining ones were particularly close, but let's go and talk about the team that's tied with Yuki in the standing. Let's talk about Ruthvik and Nick. I know we've talked about this team a lot lately, but they were able to pull off a win again on the back of pitching.
Yeah, back at pitching. I mean, the 12 home runs and the 42 ribbies were solid. Other than that, none of the offensive categories really wowed you. What does wow you more is 7 quality starts, the 80 Ks, the 326 ERA, the 106 WHIP. They won 5 of the 6 pitching categories to win this against an Alex and Zach team that is not a playoff team at the moment. I don't have too much to add here. Ruthvik needed to win this one. He won this one. It wasn't anything super special, but I think it highlights his need for more offense, and highlights the fact that he probably does have sufficient pitching.
Yeah, so I will say before I give matchup MVP that you can kind of, for this week where it seemed like to be a down offensive week, we can adjust kind of in our mind what a good offensive week was, and this was an offensive week that was better than most teams. So I won't ding Ruthvik too hard for it this week. Matchup MVP is going to be Shane Bieber, though. He got a pair of quality starts with a 129 ERA. That's three pitchers in a row winning matchup MVP, but Bieber was the best one so far. He had 14 Ks. Really terrific week. Those 2 quality starts ended up flipping that category. Overall, really remarkable job.
All right, which matchup do we want to turn to next?
The rest could go in any order. Do you have a preference?
The one I happened to pull up was UV Anthony. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, let's do it. I felt pretty comfortable most of the week here against Anthony. I did not have a very good offensive week. Although again, most teams did not, but I particularly did not. I only hit 8 homers, which barely beat Anthony's 7. I hit 25 RBIs, which ended up losing. My on base was disappointing. So I had a rough week there, but again, not too bad because it was against Anthony and I was able to overcome it. Um, I pitched solidly, but not spectacularly. I know a lot of other teams pitch better. Overall, kind of a mediocre week from me, but certainly enough to do the job. But someone who was not mediocre is once again Aaron Judge, who is going to be my matchup MVP. He hit 3 more homers. He had a 556 on base. Interestingly enough, those were 3 solo homers, and he didn't drive in any other runs. But he did steal a base this week, which was pretty cool of him. I always like seeing the big power guys steal a base for me. They do that once in a while. Juan Soto had another good week, and Framber Valdez made a phenomenal first start for my team, so I'll give him a shout out as well. But Judge gets my matchup MVP.
Yeah, I largely agree with everything that you said. I mean, I think if you were playing a better team this week, you probably would have lost. Wasn't your best week. The offense, you're right, was down. The pitching was solid enough, but that 130 whip was a little high, especially given the ERA that you had. I was a little surprised that that was the case. Um, but yeah, I mean, just kind of a standard. Everybody has weeks like this. I wouldn't read too much into it. You pulled out the win, and I think that's that. Anything else you'd like to talk about before we move on?
No, we're rolling through these. We just talked about mine. Want to talk about yours?
Yeah, let's talk about mine. Pretty solid week for my team, especially Saturday at a 525 OBP with 5 home runs and 12 ribbies and an Aaron Nola complete game to go with it. Um, this is roughly how my team's been performing for the most part over the last few weeks. Very solid pitching, 243 ERA, 0.91 whip, 6 quality starts, 4 saves, 3 holds, all awesome, along with 72 Ks. The offensive categories weren't quite as strong, but again, in this adjusted week, this was actually one of the better numbers. I feel like my 342 OEP might have actually led it this week, which I think no, Conor to 358, but mine was second, which I think kind of shows you what the offenses were like this week. I had predicted a 12-0 on the podcast last week for this matchup, but I came close. I lost runs by 1 and then tied doubles and holds. So not quite a 12-0, but I will certainly take a 9-1-2 win. Who do you think my matchup MVP was? Curious to see who you think.
Yeah, no, I could go in a few different ways for your matchup MVP. But really the one guy who stood out above all was Max Muncy. He's a guy you've kind of either on the podcast or to me on the side debated trading away, cutting bait on. But he's turned it around. He was remarkable this week. He drove in 7 runs. He had a 550 on base. He had 3 homers plus a couple doubles. I'm sure you're glad you did not get rid of him before this week.
Yeah, thank God. I certainly considered selling low on him at one point, and I'm glad I didn't. Certainly with no Tatis, to have any infield bat that's hitting solid is certainly a huge boost. So very excited that Muncy's turned it around. I knew he had it in him. It was really just a matter of him getting healthy with the shoulder. He looks like he's playing healthier, and the main thing is driving the ball with authority. The plate discipline has been there the entire time. He just wasn't really able to drive the ball, and if just some time was all he needed, then I am fine with that. So, good for Max Muncy. I think he is certainly the right pick for my player of the week. And without
Yep.
further ado,
And I'll say Chris Bassett. I want to give him a shout out as well. He had a good week.
he did. Yeah, I think two start week, two solid starts. I
Yeah,
know he
two
had
solid starts. Only one of them was a quality start, but he didn't give up a run. It must have been, what was it?
it was five
Yeah,
shutout
8 innings
yesterday.
and 5 innings.
Yeah.
I'll shout out that.
Yeah. Absolutely. But all right, let's there was one more matchup I believe we haven't talked about. Yep, and it's Jake v EBO. Jake crushed EBO 11-1. The only category they did not win was OBP. Um, Compared to other teams, Jake had a fantastic offensive week, 56 runs, 19 doubles, 16 homers, 52 ribbies, and 7 stolen bases. The only thing that was kind of low was their OVP at 309. Um, interesting that he had 9 starts, but only 4 of them were quality starts. I mean, I'm nitpicking on the pitching side here, but the rest of the pitching numbers were really solid and more than enough to beat an EBO team that is in the throes of a rebuild here and has pretty much traded everybody relevant on their roster, with the exception of Trey Turner over in the last few months. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, Jake's team was really the only team that by normal week standards hit well. I mean, 56 runs, 52 RBIs, that's very good numbers for just about any week. Including this one where no one hit well. Yeah, 7 steals as well were great. Clean sweep of the pitching categories as well. Nothing to complain about. EBO did drive in a decent number of runs, but other than that, it was just not a very good week. They only used 3 starts. They only got 22 Ks. So yeah, just kind of disappointing from them, and maybe disappointing for Jake because he almost, without looking, he would have beaten every other team in the league this week. So disappointing that he had to face EBO instead of this being his week to face me, or this being his week to face you.
That happens to everyone, though.
That's true. And a win is a win. And with apologies to Blake Snell and Michael Harris, I got to give matchup MVP to Manny Machado, who drove in 10 runs with a 48 on base. He also hit 5 doubles, which was a lot of doubles, and led Jake's team and led him to that 19 doubles total for the week. 7 runs also.
Yep. Well, there you have it. Anything else you would like to add, or have we talked about all the? Yeah, I think we have talked about all the matchups.
Yeah, we went through those quickly, but it's a couple weeks in a row where with a lot of blowouts. Hopefully this week is different. And which of the matchups do you think is the most exciting one for this week?
Yeah, I think there's 2 of them. I think that me versus Conor, this is the only one between two, or one of the 2 matchups between 2 playoff teams at the moment. I'm currently in the driver's seat for the number 2 seed. I control my own destiny. If I win out, I will be at least a 2 seed, guaranteed. After a couple weeks of playing some non-playoff teams here, I'm back playing some playoff teams to end the season. This is going to be my first full week without Tatis. We'll see if he actually makes his way onto my actual roster, if he's able to stay on the IL for the rest of the week. I'm not really sure what's going to happen there, but certainly a huge for Conor as well. It's possible that he could lose this week and be out of the playoff race entirely. And if he wants to stick at a pace to be one of the higher seeds, this is a must win for him. So I think this is certainly going to be an interesting matchup. And before I talk about the other matchup, what do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, there's really not a whole lot to say that you haven't said. These 2 teams are in an interesting spot for sure, and it's going to decide a lot for the playoffs.
Absolutely. And then the second one is Yuki versus Erik. Erik is same position as me in a sense that he controls his own destiny, but his destiny is the number 1 seed. So if he wins out, he will be the number 1 seed. Even if he loses a game, he could probably still be the number 1 seed. So he's kind of cruising. Yuki always has a knack for upsets, though. And Yuki's playing for his playoff life right now. He is still tied with Ruthvik. Um, it's possible that Yuki, takes a 6 seed over him. I forget who has a tiebreaker. I think it might be Yuki. Um,
Yes, Yuki currently has the tiebreaker over Ruthvik.
okay, so um, you know, Yuki certainly has the advantage there with the tiebreaker over Ruthvik, but any other advantage that he can take to be able to secure a playoff spot or maybe even a higher seed than just a 6 seed would be huge for him. So I think that's certainly another matchup to watch. Anything else you'd like to add about that matchup?
Yes, this is the one that intrigued me a little bit more than the other one. Just because I think both teams are in different spots for sure, but I think there's a lot of variance, particularly in Yuki's result. But if Yuki beats Erik, then that throws Erik's 1 seed into a lot of question, and it proves that, hey, maybe I could beat Erik. And then for Yuki, this is definitely an important one. He doesn't necessarily need to win this yet in the playoffs, but if he does, then his biggest test is behind him, although he does face me next week. It's a tough path for Yuki to hold on to that 6 seed, but a win here would be huge in terms of maintaining that spot. So I think, yeah, both of these teams are in interesting spots. It's a fun one.
Yeah. No, I think that's very fair. I think it's a great analysis there. We will see how that turns out, but it is now time for us to review how we did last week in our weekly predictions. Uh, let's see here. As you all may recall, last week I won 6-0, which is not something we see super often. Let's see if that happened again. Uh, you and I both correctly picked myself to win. Um, we both picked Erik, or sorry, I picked Erik to win. You picked Conor and Erik to tie. And they indeed, Erik did indeed win. Uh, we both picked yourself to win. We both picked Andrew to beat Yuki. So unfortunately, there will not be another 6-0 this week. We both picked Jake and Ruthvik to win. So pretty solid weeks overall for us. Actually, I went 5-1, and you went 4-1-1, which means I
Interesting. Yeah, you're pulling away again.
am pulling away again. I was 5-0-1 week 15, 6-0 last week, and 5-1 this week. So that's now 16-1-1 over the past 3 weeks. But this means I am now 59, 24, and 19, and you are now 55, 22, and 25. I believe I am still first in the standings, which means that you get to do your pick'em first.
All right, I get to pick first. I went back to my tie picking ways, and whenever I pick a tie, I feel like I'm always right, but I never get it. Maybe this week will be different. I think I am going to beat Andrew now that I have his 2 best pitchers. I think you will beat Conor, but it could be close. I think Erik will beat Yuki, but this could be sneaky close. I think Jake will have no problem with Alex and Zach. I think Ruthvik will beat EBO. And I think Anthony is going to beat the Bellies. I guess I'm realizing now that you were supposed to pick first, but it doesn't matter too much because I don't think your predictions are going to be very different than mine.
Nope. As a matter of fact, I think I'm literally just gonna make the same predictions. I don't have much else to say there. I think that if I did have to pick a potential upset of the week, I would say Erik v Yuki. Just because I think Yuki can be sneaky, and Erik's offense, low key, over the last 3 weeks hasn't been as good. Um, I also think Conor definitely has the potential to upset me. I mean, he's a very good team. We all know what happened in the semis last year, and he and I played a very close matchup in what I believe was week 3 or week 4 this season. I narrowly won 6-5-1. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, those are our picks. We have identical picks for this week. I don't remember the last time we had identical picks.
I think we probably never have, right? Because I think we've maybe we did one week, but I think we've just kind of tried to avoid it before, and this time we didn't care.
You know what? Week 7 we had identical picks, and we won 5-0-1 that week. I tied EBO. We both picked me to win, but we correctly picked all the other matchups. That looks like it. There's been a couple weeks where we've had like one of us has picked one of the matchups differently, yeah, for the most part, we try to be different. Even though you and I seem to be thinking alike quite a bit more recently on the podcast. So
I think we always have.
We always have, but I think it's become even stronger in the podcast era. Yeah. It's been quite a long episode. We have I think it was like an hour and 40-ish minutes or so. Anything else you like to add before we head off?
No, yeah, that one with my sore throat ended up being a lot longer than I anticipated, but that's okay. It's always fun.
It's pre-deadline preview week. We're bound to have a long episode in here. We've had a couple shorter episodes recently, I feel like.
That's true. Yeah, we had a lot to talk about. We'll probably have a lot to talk about next week. And we're just getting into the home stretch. A lot can change between now and the end of the year, and it's going to be a ton of fun. We'll be right here for it.
Yep. Well, with that, until next time, we will see you on the other side of the trade deadline. And we don't know.
This podcast is good.